A lone German shepherd limped through the blizzard, her paw bleeding, her ribs showing beneath a torn service vest that once bore a military tag. Behind her, two tiny puppies stumbled in the snow, crying for warmth that wasn't there. And miles away, an ex-Special Forces soldier, broken by war and silence, drove without knowing why. Her headlights cut through that same storm. Fate wasn't calling her home. It was leading her to them. What she found that night wasn't just a stray dog. It was a soldier who'd already given everything and still had more love to give. What happened next will make you believe that some bonds are written not in blood but in loyalty. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. The late winter wind swept down from the Victorian high country, turning the highway into a ribbon of white silence. In the Alps of Victoria, winter did not arrive. It lingered, heavy and uninvited, draping itself over every snow gum, every frozen creek, every soul still brave enough to stay. The sky was the color of ash, the light dim and cold, as if the sun itself had forgotten this corner of the world. A ute cut through the storm, its headlights carving faint tunnels in the snow. Behind the wheel sat Kira Wallace, a woman molded by order and loss. At 38, she looked older than her years, the war carved deep into the lines of her face. Her short dark brown hair was flecked with grey and a faint scar crossed her left cheek like a ghost from another life. Her eyes, steel blue and distant, belonged to someone who had seen too much and learned to say very little about it. She had the lean, wiry strength of a marathon runner, her posture straight even when alone, as though discipline were the only thing still holding her upright. Kira had once been a trooper in the SASR, a soldier who moved with purpose and precision. But now that purpose was gone. She lived by habit, driving when she couldn't sleep, fixing what wasn't broken, pretending the silence didn't bother her. She had returned from Afghanistan with a limp that no doctor could see and a loneliness that no one could cure. The wipers scraped across the windshield, fighting the accumulating frost. She was on her way to her late father's shack, a weather-beaten relic buried deep among the snow-drenched gums, a place she went when the world became too loud. As she rounded a curve, something caught her eye, a dark shape barely visible against the white. It staggered once, then collapsed near the guardrail. Kira's instincts fired before her thoughts did. She eased the ute to the shoulder, threw it in park, and stepped into the wind. The cold bit instantly, sharp and metallic, slicing through the layers of her uniform-style jacket. Snow whipped around her as she trudged forward. The shape moved again, a faint twitch of life in a sea of white. Then she saw it, a German shepherd, a large female, her fur matted with ice and streaks of blood. She was trembling violently, trying to shield two tiny bundles pressed against her belly. Two puppies, no bigger than Kira's hands, whined weakly in the wind. Kira knelt beside her, the snow crunching beneath her boots. "Hey there," she said softly, her voice low and steady, the same tone she'd once used to calm frightened soldiers on the battlefield. The dog lifted her head, eyes narrowing. They were amber, bright but clouded with exhaustion. And behind that exhaustion, something else, defiance. "Easy, girl," Kira murmured, removing a glove and reaching slowly into her pocket. She pulled out a piece of jerky, something she always carried on the road. She placed it on the snow between them and waited. The dog hesitated, sniffed, then crept forward an inch. She took the food gently, her teeth brushing Kira's fingers. That was enough. Kira leaned closer and saw the dull glint of metal under her neck. A military tag half buried in fur and frost. She brushed away the snow and read the engraving. K937. The world seemed to still around her. Her pulse quickened. "You're not just a stray," she whispered. A cold gust howled through the gums, lifting the edges of her fur. Her back leg was twisted awkwardly, a shard of metal protruding from an old wound that had reopened. Shrapnel, she thought, a battlefield injury. The puppies whimpered, and the mother turned to them instantly, curling her body tighter around their fragile forms. The movement made her wince in pain. Kira's throat tightened. She had seen soldiers move like that. People bleeding out but still shielding their comrades. There was no mistaking what she was. She was a soldier, too. She reached for her coat and unzipped it, wrapping the two puppies inside. They were barely breathing, their small chests rising and falling like fragile paper lanterns. She looked back at the mother. "Come on, girl, let's get you out of here." The dog growled weakly, but didn't fight as Kira slid her arms under her chest. She was heavier than she looked, her muscles wiry and scarred, her body trembling against Kira's. She lifted her into the ute, settled the pups beside her, and shut the door before the wind could steal the little heat they had left. The track to the shack felt longer than usual. The snow fell harder and visibility dropped to almost nothing. Kira gripped the wheel, glancing now and then at the passenger seat. The mother's head rested on the console, her eyes half closed but alert. Every few minutes she shifted to check on the puppies. The sight stirred something old inside Kira, something she had buried under medals and silence. When she finally reached the shack, the headlights swept across a sagging porch and a snow-covered roof. The place was as she'd left it. Lonely, cold, but standing. She parked, carried the dogs inside, and kicked the door shut behind her. The air inside was bitter. Unmoving, Kira lit the fireplace with practiced hands, the flames catching on dry gumwood until the room flickered with warmth. The scent of smoke and eucalyptus filled the small space. She found an old wool blanket and spread it near the fire. Then she lifted the German Shepherd onto it, careful not to touch the wounded leg. The puppies she placed between her paws. They stirred faintly, noses twitching. The dog watched her the whole time, eyes tracking every move, assessing her the way soldiers assess strangers, measuring threat and mercy in equal parts. "You're safe now," Kira said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you." When the fire grew brighter, she crouched beside her and examined the leg. The metal fragment glinted again, with a clean cloth and a pair of tweezers from her old medic kit. She began to work. The dog flinched once, twice, but didn't bite. She trusted Kira, or maybe she was too tired to fight. Either way, she let her remove the shrapnel and clean the wound. Blood stained the cloth, bright against the pale fur. When it was done, Kira wrapped her leg with gauze, then sat back on her heels, studying her face. She had the strong muzzle of a purebred German Shepherd, the kind trained for combat, not show. There were faint grey hairs along her muzzle. She wasn't young, maybe 6 or 7 years old. Her breathing slowed, steadied. She poured some warm water into a bowl and set it down. The dog drank cautiously, keeping her gaze on Kira. A puppy squirmed, one letting out a soft squeak that made her nudge it closer with her nose. Kira smiled faintly, though it felt strange on her face, like a muscle she hadn't used in years. She leaned back against the wall, the fire's glow washing over her features. The warmth began to loosen the stiffness in her chest. The shack was small, one room, a stove, a narrow cot, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel empty. The sound of the crackling wood mingled with the soft breathing of 3 fragile lives. Kira's gaze drifted to the dog's collar again. The tag seemed almost to pulse in the firelight. K937. She whispered the numbers aloud. Somewhere in her memory, a call sign echoed, a mission gone wrong, an explosion, a handler's scream lost in static. She closed her eyes. For years, she had tried to outrun those sounds, but now they had found her again, wrapped in fur and silence. She reached for her coffee flask, took a slow sip, and stared at the fire. The dog's eyes met hers. For a long moment, neither moved. Then something shifted, a quiet acknowledgement that no words could touch. The puppies slept, their small bodies twitching as they dreamed. The storm outside raged against the windows, the wind howling through the gums. Inside it was just them, the broken soldier and the wounded K9, bound by a fate neither could explain. Kira stretched her legs toward the fire, the heat soaking into the worn leather of her boots. The German Shepherd lifted her head weakly, then with a heavy sigh, laid it down across Kira's foot. Her fur was warm, coarse, trembling slightly. Kira froze, afraid to break the fragile peace. The flames reflected in her amber eyes, twin sparks of life refusing to fade. For a long time, Kira said nothing. She simply watched the fire, the light dancing across her face and the dogs. Somewhere in that silent exchange, the loneliness she had carried for years softened, replaced by something quieter, older, a shared understanding between survivors. The mother dog closed her eyes, content at last, and in the gentle flicker of the shack's fire, her head rested on Kira's boot, the flames reflecting in both their eyes. One woman and one forgotten warrior, meeting again beneath the same broken light. Morning arrived slowly, brushing a pale light over the Victorian forest. The storm had passed, leaving the world muffled under a thick white stillness. The snow gums drooped beneath their new coats of snow, and the air was sharp and clean, the kind of quiet that almost made Kira forget what noise felt like. Inside the shack, the fire had dwindled to soft embers. The German Shepherd slept near it, her 2 puppies pressed tightly against her stomach. Their breathing came in tiny puffs, warm and rhythmic. Kira sat on the floor beside them, her back against the wall, a half-empty mug of coffee cooling in her hand. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, memories tangled with dreams, sand instead of snow, fire instead of flame, the sound of helicopter rotors fading too fast. But when she looked down at the mother dog, lying protectively around her pups, the weight in her chest eased just enough to breathe again. "Guess we all made it through the night," she murmured. The mother stirred, lifting her head, Her amber eyes studied Kira with the calm vigilance of a soldier who never truly rests. She still didn't trust her. Not fully, but she didn't fear her anymore, either. The gauze around her leg was stained dark where the wound had bled again. Kira leaned forward, reaching for the first aid kit. "We'll fix that, girl." She growled low when Kira's hand brushed the bandage. Her teeth didn't show, but the warning was clear. Kira froze. "Easy, Riley," she said softly without thinking. The name slipped out of her. Riley. It fit her somehow. Strong, simple, alive. The dog blinked as if acknowledging it. "Riley," Kira repeated, more certain this time. "That's you." She waited a few minutes, then tried again, slower, careful to keep her movements small. She unwrapped the gauze, cleaned the wound, and this time Riley didn't growl. She just watched, eyes following every motion, muscles twitching but not resisting. Her trust was a fragile thing, but it was there, fragile as the ice dripping from the eaves outside. The puppies were awake now. One, the slightly bigger one with a darker muzzle, wobbled toward Kira's boot and bit at the laces with tiny, clumsy teeth. The smaller pup, the one with softer eyes, stayed close to Riley's belly, squeaking quietly. Kira smiled despite herself. "You two need names, huh?" She tapped her knee, thinking. "Ace," she said to the bold one chewing on her boot. "And you?" She nodded toward the timid one. "Daisy, that sound good?" Ace barked, or tried to, and fell over sideways. Daisy merely blinked at him and yawned. Riley watched the exchange, her tail thumping once against the floor. Kira patched the last of her wound and then sat back, exhaling. The fire was warming the shack now, and for a moment the space felt less like exile and more like shelter. She took another sip of cold coffee, grimacing at the taste. Maybe, she thought, this was what purpose felt like. Not missions or medals, but keeping something alive that shouldn't have survived. By noon, the sun pushed through the grey clouds, scattering diamond light across the snow. Kira decided to fetch supplies. More gauze, disinfectant, real dog food. The nearest town was Omeo, 20 kilometers down the mountain. Before leaving, she shoveled snow from the porch and filled a metal bowl with water. "I'll be back, Riley," she said. The German shepherd tilted her head slightly, one ear twitching. When Kira reached for her coat, she gave a soft huff, as if reminding her she was watching. The drive down was slow. The roads were slick, and her ute groaned climbing each hill. When she finally reached Omeo, she stopped at the small general store on the edge of town. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, releasing a wave of dry, heated air. Behind the counter stood Merrill Jones, the store owner. She was in her late 50s, tall and lean, with silver hair pulled back in a low bun. Her eyes, a faded blue, carried both kindness and caution, the kind found in people who have lost more than they speak about. She wore a wool cardigan and an old wedding ring that had been polished nearly smooth from years of wear. "Well, if it isn't Kira Wallace," she said, her voice a blend of warmth and weariness. "Haven't seen you since your dad's funeral." Kira nodded, removing her gloves. "Been keeping to myself." "I can tell," Merrill replied with a half smile. "You always were the quiet one." Kira picked up bandages and antiseptic from the shelves, then paused near a stack of dog food. "You still carry the good stuff? The grain-free kind?" Merrill raised an eyebrow. "Didn't take you for a dog person." "Long story," Kira said. "Those are usually the best kind." Merrill rang up the items, but curiosity got the better of her. "So, what's the story? Found a stray?" Kira hesitated. "Yeah, she's hurt. German shepherd, 2 puppies with her." Merrill's expression softened. "Poor thing, my late husband used to train canine units for the Victoria Police. Some of those dogs, they never stopped being soldiers, even when they're broken." Kira looked up, meeting her gaze. "You mean they remember?" Merrill nodded slowly. "Always. You can see it in their eyes. Like they're still waiting for a command that'll never come." Her words lingered with Kira long after she left the store. When Kira returned to the shack, the sun was dipping low, painting the snow with pink and gold. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. She parked the ute and stepped out, half expecting silence. Instead, she heard barking, the sharp, alert kind that carried training. She rushed inside. Riley stood between the door and the fireplace, her stance low but steady, eyes locked on her. The pups were behind her, whining softly. She didn't growl, just stared until she recognized Kira's scent. Then she relaxed, tail wagging once before she limped back to the fire. "Still on guard duty, huh?" Kira smiled. "You really are a soldier." She poured fresh water and opened the new bag of food. Riley sniffed cautiously, then began to eat. Ace and Daisy followed clumsily, bumping into her legs as they fought for space. For the first time since she'd found them, Kira heard a sound that wasn't fear. A low, steady rumble from Riley's chest. It wasn't a growl, it was a purr of contentment. A canine's version of peace. As night fell, Kira sat by the fire, patching her worn gloves. The puppies slept in a tangle near the hearth. Riley watched her, head resting on her paws, eyes half-lidded but awake. Kira could feel her gaze even when she wasn't looking. She thought about Meryl's words. Dogs that remember, soldiers that don't know how to stop fighting. Maybe that's why she couldn't walk away. Maybe that's why Riley hadn't bitten her, even when she touched her wounds. They were both built to endure, both forgotten when they could no longer serve. She glanced toward the door. The wind howled outside, brushing against the windows like restless fingers. Inside, the fire glowed soft and steady. Riley shifted, standing just long enough to limp across the floor. She stopped beside Kira, her breath warm against her hand. Then, carefully, she lowered her head onto Kira's leg. Kira froze. Her fur was coarse beneath her palm, but alive, warm, trusting. Slowly, she placed her hand on Riley's back. She didn't flinch. For the first time since the war, Kira didn't either. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was full of something quiet, something like healing, and in that fragile peace, woman and dog sat together, their wounds remembering, their hearts finally beginning to forget. The third morning after the storm broke over the high country with pale sunlight spilling across the frozen valley. The world outside Kira's shack seemed untouched by time. Snow gums heavy with snow. The air sharp enough to taste. Inside, the fire hummed low and steady, casting a soft glow over the room. Riley was lying near the hearth, her head on her paws, eyes half open. The two puppies tumbled over each other nearby, full of clumsy energy that belonged only to the young. Kira watched them with the faintest smile tugging at her lips. It had been a long time since laughter had found its way into this shack, even in its smallest form. She had decided that morning to give Riley a proper wash. The water in the metal basin steamed gently, mixing with the faint smell of eucalyptus and ash. Riley's coat had begun to lose its dull, dirt-caked look, and Kira wanted to clean the remnants of blood and mud from her fur completely. "All right, Sergeant," she said quietly, nodding to her as though she understood ranks. "Let's make you look like yourself again." Riley stared at the tub, ears flicking back. She didn't like water, that much was clear, but she trusted Kira enough not to fight. When Kira lifted her gently into the basin, she trembled, but she stayed. The puppies whimpered nearby, confused at their mother's distress. Kira chuckled softly. "Don't worry, kids, your mum's tougher than she looks." She worked slowly, running her calloused hands through Riley's thick fur, the warm water turning grey with dirt. Beneath the grime, Riley's coat revealed itself in all its richness, a sheen of black and tan that caught the light like burnished copper. Her muscles twitched occasionally, the way old soldiers twitch when someone brushes near an old wound. Kira felt the same way sometimes when people tried to reach too close. When her fingers brushed near Riley's collar, she felt something odd, a hard edge beneath the leather strap. She frowned, wiping her hand on a towel before inspecting it. The collar wasn't an ordinary one. It was reinforced military grade, the kind used for service dogs and active units. She noticed a small metal plate half hidden beneath the inner lining. "Well, what's this?" she murmured. Using her pocket knife, she carefully pried it open. A tiny silver chip, no bigger than her thumbnail, was embedded inside, a data tag, the kind that could store encrypted files. Kira's chest tightened, her breath came slower. "You've got secrets, huh?" she whispered. Riley looked at her with those amber eyes, blinking once, as if she already knew what Kira was about to find. After drying her off and wrapping her in a wool blanket, Kira carried the small chip to the desk near the window. The laptop there was old, her father's, with a cracked corner and keys that stuck. She plugged the chip into an adapter and waited as the screen flickered to life. For a moment, nothing happened, just a blinking cursor. Then a folder appeared, Bravo Team K9 Unit Records. Kira's heart pounded as she clicked it open. Dozens of files spilled across the screen. Mission logs, status reports, names she recognized like ghosts whispering from the past. One file bore the name, K937. Handler, Trooper Kira Wallace. Her hand froze above the trackpad. "No," she whispered. She opened it anyway. The screen filled with reports, audio fragments, and one short video file marked, Operation Nightfall. The image was grainy, filmed from a helmet camera. A desert night, flashes of light, shouting, the bark of a German shepherd cutting through the chaos. Kira saw herself, younger, sharper, crouching behind a wall of sandbags. Then the explosion. The camera shook violently, static swallowing the sound. Through the blur, she saw the dog, Riley, rushing forward, pushing her back just before the blast hit. She had never remembered that part clearly. The shock wave had taken away sound, memory, almost everything. She had been told her canine died instantly, unrecoverable, but the truth was right there, breathing now in her shack. Riley had survived. Kira sat back, the chair creaking beneath her. Her eyes burned. "You were there," she said hoarsely, looking toward Riley. The dog was lying near the fire again, one ear turned toward her. "Listening. You saved me, didn't you? And they left you behind." Her throat tightened. Years of guilt she'd buried deep began to surface. Guilt for the soldiers who didn't make it. For the dogs they never recovered. For the missions that never ended clean. She rubbed her face with both hands, trying to steady the tremor in her chest. Riley rose slowly, limping closer, her tag glinting faintly in the firelight. She rested her chin on Kira's knee, as if answering her unspoken thoughts. The shack door creaked open just then, breaking the spell. Merrill Jones stood framed by the doorway, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, snow dusting her hair. "You really ought to lock your door out here, Kira," she said with a small smile. "Never know who might wander in." Kira blinked, surprised. "Merrill, what are you doing up here?" "Brought ice cream," Merrill said, holding up a small bag. "And some proper food that isn't canned beans." Merrill stepped inside, the warmth of the shack wrapping around her. Her face softened when she saw Riley. "She looks better," she said quietly. "You've got a good touch." Kira hesitated, then gestured toward the laptop. "You should see this." Merrill leaned over the desk, her silver hair catching the glow of the screen. As the footage replayed, she covered her mouth with one hand. "Dear Lord, she was yours." Kira nodded slowly. "They told me she was gone. But she survived. They just didn't bring her home." Merrill's eyes shone with sympathy. "Sometimes the ones who save us get left behind because the world doesn't know what to do with survivors." She placed a gentle hand on Kira's shoulder. "Maybe she was sent back to you, Kira, not so you could save her, but so you could forgive yourself." Her words struck deep. Kira had spent years avoiding mirrors, avoiding memories, because they all told the same story, that she had lived when better souls had not. But now, staring into Riley's steady gaze, something began to shift. Maybe survival wasn't the curse she thought it was. Maybe it was an invitation. When Merrill left an hour later, the snow had started again. She waved from her truck, her figure fading into the white. Kira closed the door and turned back to Riley. The puppies were asleep, a small pile of warmth on the blanket. The firelight shimmered across the metal tag still hanging from Riley's neck. Kira crouched beside her, running her fingers gently along the dog's back. "I failed you once," she murmured. "I won't again." Riley lifted her head and nudged Kira's hand with her nose. The softest gesture of trust. Outside, the wind rose, whispering through the gum trees like an echo of voices long gone. Inside the shack, Kira Wallace sat beside the dog who had once dragged her back from death. Realizing that for the first time in years, the past no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a beginning. The days that followed were the kind that came slow and heavy in the Victorian high country winter. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold clung stubbornly to everything, the gums, the air, even the bones. Yet inside Kira's shack, life had begun to stir again. The fire in the hearth rarely went out now. It was no longer just a shelter for one woman, but a place where warmth was shared between four souls learning how to trust again. Kira stood in the clearing behind the shack that morning, her breath fogging in the air. Her old SASR jacket, faded at the seams, hung on her frame. A whistle dangled from a cord around her neck and a length of rope coiled in her hand. Riley stood in front of her, tall and alert, her ears pricked forward, but her stance uncertain. Her leg had healed enough for her to walk without limping, though the scar beneath the fur would always remain. The two puppies, Ace and Daisy, were bouncing at her paws, tails wagging furiously, unaware that something important was beginning. "All right, Sergeant," Kira said, her voice calm but firm. "Let's see what you remember." She blew the whistle once. Sharp and short, Riley flinched, her body jerking back, eyes darting to the sound as if expecting danger. Kira's stomach tightened. She had known this might happen. That sound wasn't just a command to Riley. It was a memory, one that came with sand, explosions, and loss. She crouched, lowering her tone. "Easy, girl, it's not that kind of whistle anymore." She waited, letting Riley steady herself. Then she gave a short hand signal, a closed fist followed by a downward motion. Riley hesitated, then lowered herself into a sit. "Good," Kira whispered. She stepped closer, offering her a small piece of jerky. "Good girl." The training began like that. Slow, deliberate, and patient. Some instincts returned easily, others came back with resistance. She responded to commands with remarkable intelligence. Her movements precise, even after years away from service. But when Kira raised her voice too quickly or dropped something loud, Riley tensed, eyes flicking toward the trees as if waiting for orders that would never come. The puppies watched every move. Ace copied his mother's stance, chest puffed out, trying to look brave. Daisy, smaller and gentler, stayed close to Riley, her tail tucked, but her eyes bright with curiosity. Kira smiled to herself. Looks like I've got myself a little platoon. By noon, Riley was responding to whistle tones again, though she still blinked at the sound. Kira walked backward across the snow, calling her name. Riley, come. She bounded forward, powerful and swift, stopping right in front of Kira with military precision. Kira laughed, a sound that felt strange but good. That's my girl. From the porch, Merrill Jones watched, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. She had driven up from town that morning after seeing Kira's missed calls. Her grey hair was tucked under a knit hat, and her cheeks were flushed red from the cold. She looked both proud and amused. I've seen worse soldiers take longer to follow orders, she called out. Kira chuckled. You saying she's a better recruit than me? Merrill shrugged. She listens faster. She stepped closer, her boots crunching on the snow. You should share this, she said, pulling out her phone. People need to see this kind of hope again. Kira frowned slightly. What do you mean? Let me record some of it. You don't have to say much. Just her, the training, the progress. I know a bloke at the ABC. You'd be surprised what stories like this can do. Kira hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but no pity story. She's not broken. Merrill smiled. Neither are you. By the time the sun began to dip, the clearing was filled with laughter, barking, and the whir of Merrill's phone camera. Riley was running short drills. Sit, stay, come, heel, and Ace and Daisy were tumbling through the snow beside her, adding chaos to order. Merrill narrated softly as she filmed, her voice steady and warm. After years of being forgotten, a war dog learns to trust again, she said quietly, and in teaching her, a soldier learns the same. That night after dinner, Kira sat by the fire while Merrill uploaded the video. Riley lay beside her, her head resting against Kira's knee, her eyes half closed. The puppies slept nearby, their paws twitching as they dreamed. The gentle crackle of the fire filled the silence between them. Merrill's phone buzzed once, then twice. She looked up, surprised. It's already got a few hundred views, she said. People are sharing it. Kira raised an eyebrow. That fast? Merrill smiled, scrolling. It's the internet, Kira. Folks love dogs, but they love stories of second chances even more. Kira leaned back, taking a long breath. As long as it doesn't turn into one of those sad stories. Merrill looked at her over her glasses. This isn't a sad story. It's a story about healing. You just haven't realized it yet. Over the next few days, the video spread further than either of them expected. Comments poured in, messages from veterans, K9 handlers, and ordinary people moved by what they saw. Boxes began arriving at the small post office in Omeo. Blankets, toys, dog treats, even a few handwritten letters addressed to Riley the hero dog. Merrill read a few aloud during her visits, her voice catching occasionally. Kira wasn't sure what to make of it all. She hadn't asked for attention, but when she saw the joy it brought to Merrill, and the way Riley perked up when strangers stopped by the fence to wave, she couldn't deny it was doing some good. The world, it seemed, hadn't forgotten all its kindness after all. One morning, the sky was pale blue and cloudless. The air smelled faintly of gum trees and smoke. Kira decided to test something. She set up a simple course using wooden posts and a rope line. A miniature training ground. Riley stood at attention beside her, her ears forward. All right, girl, let's see what you remember. Kira jogged backward through the snow, calling, heel, sit, stay. Riley moved like muscle memory incarnate, her paws landing perfectly, tail swaying in balance. The puppies ran beside her, slipping and skidding, but trying their best. Then, just to test her instinct, Kira stumbled deliberately and fell onto the snow. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Riley barked once, a sharp, commanding sound, and lunged forward. She gripped the sleeve of Kira's coat with her teeth and pulled, steady and strong, until Kira rolled to her knees. Kira laughed out loud, snow clinging to her hair and jacket. Still a protector, huh? Riley wagged her tail, panting, her eyes bright with that old soldier fire. The puppies circled them, barking high-pitched encouragements of their own. Merrill, who had been watching from the porch again, clapped her gloved hands together. That's it, Kira, you see? She's not remembering the pain anymore. She's remembering who she is. That night, when Merrill had gone back to town and the shack was quiet again, Kira sat by the fire with her notebook open. She had started writing again. Just fragments, notes, Memories that used to hurt too much to touch. Riley lay at her feet. Ace and Daisy nestled against her belly. The flames flickered over the rough wooden walls, painting everything in gold and amber. Kira stared at the three dogs, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years, something that went beyond fire. She whispered softly, mostly to herself, maybe healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering, right? Riley's tail thumped once in reply, as if she agreed. The morning sky hung low over the mountains, grey and heavy, with the promise of another storm. The snow around the shack had hardened into a crust that cracked beneath each step. The kind of cold that gnawed into the joints and slowed everything it touched. Inside, Kira was sipping coffee by the window, watching the pale shapes of Ace and Daisy chasing each other across the porch. Riley lay near the fire, her gaze half on the pups, half on Kira, always alert, even in peace. It had been 2 weeks since the first training videos went viral. Letters still arrived daily, stacked neatly in a wooden box by the door. People called Riley a hero. They called Kira one, too, though she never felt like it. She'd done what anyone should do, she told herself, brought a soldier home. The sound of tires crunching on the frozen track snapped her from her thoughts. A black SUV rolled up the path, its engine humming low and smooth. The door opened and a man stepped out, a tall figure in a dark overcoat, his polished boots cutting through the snow with authority. His hair was close-cropped, silver at the temples, and his jawline sharp as the morning frost. He moved like someone who still measured his steps by military rhythm. Kira's stomach tightened. She knew that stance anywhere. Wing Commander David Connolly. When Connolly removed his gloves and knocked on the shack door, his knuckles rapped with the precision of command. Kira opened it, a rush of cold wind following the man inside. Wing Commander, Kira said quietly, stepping aside. Wallace, Connolly replied, his voice deep and measured, each word carrying weight. He looked around the shack. The wooden walls, the flickering fire, the sleeping dogs, with an unreadable expression. You've been hard to find. I wasn't hiding, Kira said. Connolly gave a dry smile. People like you don't hide. They just drift. He removed his hat and brushed snow from his shoulders. You've got something here that doesn't belong to you. Kira's shoulders stiffened. If you mean Riley, she belongs right here. The wing commander's eyes flicked to the German shepherd, who had risen silently, placing herself between the two humans. Her ears were forward, her muscles tense. Connolly regarded her with something close to respect. She still remembers protocol, he said softly. Good girl. Then turning back to Kira. She's registered as K937, property of the Australian Defence Force. Officially declared missing in action after the Bravo team explosion. When her tag resurfaced online, it set off some alarms in Canberra. Kira felt a slow anger rising. You mean when the world found out she was alive? Connolly sighed, removing a folded document from his coat pocket. The RAF has contracted with a research program in Canberra. Advanced K9 rehabilitation. They're rebuilding combat readiness in dogs that served. Riley's data could help save hundreds like her. Kira stared at the paper without taking it. You're talking about turning her back into a weapon. Connolly's jaw flexed. I'm talking about purpose. These animals were born and trained to serve. You know that better than anyone. Kira took a slow step forward. And I also know what happens when they outlive their usefulness. They get shelved, reassigned, forgotten. You can't give her back to that life. The silence between them was thick. Outside, the wind moaned against the windows. Riley let out a low growl. Quiet, but unmistakable. Connolly's expression softened, the authority in his voice replaced by something weary. You think I don't know what that feels like? Wallace, I commanded 26 dogs through 3 tours. Half didn't come back. The ones that did. He stopped, exhaling slowly. You can't fix what they've seen. You can only give it direction. Kira's hand curled at her side. She's not broken, sir. She's home. Connolly studied her, his grey eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in a kind of reluctant admiration. You always did have a problem taking orders. He slipped the paper back into his coat. I'll give you a few days. Then the department will come for her, with or without your consent. As the door shut behind him, the echo of his boots lingered. Kira stood still for a long moment, jaw tight, before Riley nudged her hand with her nose. Her eyes, steady, intelligent, held no fear, only trust. Later that afternoon, Merrill Henderson arrived, her old red ute rattling up the icy drive. She carried a bag of groceries and the look of someone who had already heard too much. I saw that man leaving your property, she said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. Military type. I've seen that face before. Too clean, too cold. Kira poured her a cup of coffee. Wing Commander Connolly, my old company. Let me guess, Merrill said, settling into the chair by the fire. He wants her back. Kira nodded, says she's still government property. They're building some rehab facility for K9 units. Claims it's for her own good. Merrill snorted, setting the cup down hard enough to rattle. That's what they said when they retired my husband's dog. Promised he'd get a new life. You know where they sent him? A lab, where they tested sound responses for years until he couldn't stand straight anymore. Her eyes gleamed with fury and pain. You can't let him take her. Kira rubbed a hand over her face. If I don't comply, they can charge me for withholding federal property. Merrill leaned forward. Then we make it public. Properly public. That video was just the start. If they try to take her now, they'll have to explain why on the nightly news. Her determination was iron, the kind that came from loss. Kira looked at her, this woman who'd lived her own kind of war and still chose to fight again. Merrill, you don't have to. Oh, hush, she said, waving her off. You saved her life. She saved yours. People should know what happens when loyalty meets bureaucracy. By evening, Merrill was on her laptop, typing faster than Kira thought possible for someone her age. She posted updates, pictures of Riley training with the pups, clips of Kira teaching commands in the snow. She sent an email to a journalist she knew at the ABC. The story spread like wildfire again. The comments multiplied. They can't take her. She's family now. Stand your ground, soldier. Kira scrolled through them quietly, the glow of the screen reflecting in her tired eyes. She wasn't used to being defended by strangers. But now, for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. The next morning, the phone on the wall rang. She picked it up. Connolly's voice came through, calm, but strained. You've stirred quite the storm. Wallace, you always did know how to make noise when you wanted to. Kira said nothing. After a long pause, the wing commander sighed. You've got 48 hours before the order's official. Think carefully. The line clicked dead. Kira set the phone down. Exhaling through her teeth, Riley lifted her head, watching her. Ace and Daisy were playing near the door, batting at a loose glove. The fire popped softly, filling the silence that followed. Kira crouched beside Riley, her hand resting on her neck. Her fur was warm, her heartbeat steady beneath her palm. She looked toward the window where the snow was falling again. Soft and slow. They're coming for you, she said quietly, but they'll have to go through me first. Riley pressed her head against Kira's chest, her tail brushing the floor. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the shack, there was only the steady rhythm of two hearts that refused to be separated again. The wind carried the smell of burning eucalypt long before the first orange glow appeared over the ridge. Kira stepped outside the shack, the cold morning air colliding with the faint heat rolling down from the north. The sky, usually pale and still this early, was streaked with grey and rust. She narrowed her eyes. That's not from a chimney, she muttered. Riley padded up beside her, her nose twitching, tail stiff. Ace and Daisy followed close behind, ears pricked. The bush was uneasy, even the birds had gone silent. Within an hour, the smoke thickened, a wall of haze swallowing the horizon. The emergency sirens began to echo faintly from the direction of Omeo. Kira grabbed her jacket and radio, her instincts firing back into soldier rhythm. She hadn't planned to return to the field, but a bushfire was its own kind of war. Fast, merciless, and blind. She whistled softly to Riley. You're coming with me, girl. Riley barked once, short and sharp, like a salute. The drive down the mountain was brutal. Flames had begun to dance between the crowns of the stringy bark trees, leaping like wild spirits in the wind. The local CFA brigade had set up a base near the town's edge where the road met the river. Kira parked the ute, stepping out into the chaos of shouting volunteers and the crackle of burning gums. Wallace, someone yelled. She turned to see Senior Constable Bill Hogan, a man in his mid-40s with a stocky build and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. His uniform was smeared with ash and his brown eyes burned with fatigue and determination. Didn't expect to see you here. Kira nodded once. Where do you need me? There's a cottage halfway up Ridge Road, Hogan said, coughing into his sleeve. A kid's trapped inside. His parents called it in before the lines went dead. Fire's too strong for our trucks to get through. Kira glanced at the map on the bonnet of the police car. That's near the old ranger station. Exactly, Hogan said grimly. You take your dogs. You might be able to reach him faster than we can. Just be careful, Kira. This fire is moving like it's alive. Kira grabbed a wet cloth, tied it around her mouth, and motioned for Riley to follow. Ace, Daisy, heel. The dogs obeyed instantly, their training sharp, their energy focused. Together, they moved into the smoke, the air growing hotter and thicker with each step. The bush was unrecognizable. Trees that once whispered now screamed. Ash fell like snow, coating Kira's jacket. Clinging to her hair, she kept one hand on Riley's back, letting her lead. Her ears twitched constantly, every muscle alive with purpose. This was the soldier she used to be, and Kira trusted her completely. When they reached the ridge, the heat hit them like a wall. The wooden cottage ahead was half engulfed, flames licking at its roof, black smoke pouring from the windows. Through the noise, a faint cry pierced the air. Kira froze. "There," she said hoarsely, "you hear that?" Riley barked once, then lunged forward, low to the ground. Ace followed her, tail tucked, but determined. Daisy hesitated, whined, then ran after them. Kira kicked in what was left of the front door. The air inside was an oven. She could barely see through the smoke. "Hello," she shouted. "It's okay, I'm here to help." A weak voice answered from somewhere inside. "Help, please." "Riley, find," Kira commanded. The German shepherd lowered her head and darted into the thick haze, her shadow flickering through the orange light. Moments later, she barked twice, sharp, insistent. Kira followed the sound, crouching low. In the far corner, a young boy, maybe 7 or 8, was huddled under a table, his face streaked with soot and tears. Kira moved fast, wrapping her arms around the boy. "Got you, buddy, we're getting out." Just then, a beam cracked overhead and crashed to the floor. Riley darted forward, pushing Kira back with her body. Barking urgently, she guided them toward a gap near the back wall where the fire hadn't reached yet. "Good girl, go," Kira shouted. Ace and Daisy circled around, barking wildly as the path behind them collapsed. The heat was unbearable now. Her skin prickled beneath her sleeves. The exit loomed ahead, but a fallen beam blocked it. Kira tried to lift it, her muscles straining. Daisy darted forward and began tugging at the boy's sleeve, pulling him toward a narrow space between the beam and the floor. The pup's paws slipped against the hot wood, and she yelped in pain, but didn't stop. Kira pulled the boy through, coughing, the smoke clawing at her lungs. Riley pressed against her, guiding them until they stumbled into the open air. The world outside blazed orange and gold. Kira half carried the child down the hill, coughing hard, eyes burning. Behind them, Ace and Riley ran side by side while Daisy limped but kept pace. Her fur singed near one paw. When they reached the clearing, Hogan and 2 firefighters rushed forward with blankets. "We've got him," Kira gasped, handing over the boy. The firefighters wrapped the child up and carried him toward the med truck. Riley collapsed beside Kira, panting, her tongue lolling. Ace nosed her side, whining softly. Daisy limped closer, her paw blackened at the pads. Kira's heart clenched. She lifted the small dog carefully, cradling her against her chest. "You brave little fool," she murmured. "You did good." Meanwhile, miles away, Merrill Jones knelt inside the small church of Omeo, the glow of candles trembling against her lined face. The town's pews were nearly full. Men, women, children, all praying or organizing supplies. Merrill's hands were clasped tightly before her chest. Her lips moved softly. "Lord, protect them, our soldiers, our firefighters, our animals. Don't let the fire take what you've returned." The light from the stained glass window flickered red and gold, painting the statue of Christ in flame-like colors. Behind her, townsfolk loaded boxes of food and blankets into utes, following her orders without question. Merrill rose, her gray eyes glinting with quiet strength. "Let's move, people," she said firmly. "They need us up there." Back on the ridge, dawn had begun to break through the smoke. The worst of the blaze had shifted east thanks to the firefighters and changing wind. Kira sat in the ash-covered clearing, Daisy asleep in her lap, a burn salve wrapped around her paw. Riley lay beside her, licking the pup's face gently while Ace rested his head on Kira's knee. The rising sun spilled gold over them, 4 survivors framed against the fading glow of the fire. Kira exhaled, her body aching, but her heart steady. She looked down at the little pup and smiled faintly. "You're tougher than all of us." "Huh?" She glanced toward the horizon where the last traces of smoke lifted into the pink light. "Maybe this wasn't just a rescue," she whispered. "Maybe it's a reminder." Riley raised her head, ears flicking as if in agreement. The first true sunlight broke through, washing over their faces, turning ash into silver and pain into peace. Kira's hand rested on Riley's back, the other on Daisy's paw. In that quiet moment, beneath the hum of distant sirens and the whisper of wind through scorched trees, the fire's fury felt almost holy, like a cleansing that left only faith behind. And as the light grew stronger, Kira whispered to them all, her voice low and full of awe, "Looks like someone up there is still watching." The bushfire on the ridge had faded, but its echo lingered in the hearts of everyone in Omeo. The story of Riley and her pups, the rescue, The boy, the miracle at dawn, had spread far beyond the valley. Reporters came and went, their vans lining the town square, their cameras chasing Kira wherever she went. The once quiet ex-SASR soldier, who had lived in the shadow of guilt and solitude, suddenly found herself at the center of something larger than she ever wanted. But it wasn't her story the world was after. It was Riley's. She sat on the shack porch one cold morning, the mountain air thin and still. Riley rested beside her, a faint silver sheen visible on her coat from the early sun. Daisy's paw had healed, though she still walked with a small limp, and Ace was already chasing kookaburras like he owned the forest. The peace didn't last. A black government sedan approached up the narrow track, tires crunching on frost. Kira sighed. She already knew who it was before the door opened. Wing Commander Connolly stepped out again, this time in full uniform, his medals shining even under the weak light. His face was unreadable, though his eyes betrayed a mix of pride and duty. Behind him came a younger officer, Captain Eleanor Ward, early 30s, neat auburn hair tucked under her cap, her uniform pressed to perfection. She carried a briefcase and walked with sharp precision. Her expression was polite, but her gaze was cautious, almost clinical. "Kira Wallace," Connolly began, "I told you this wasn't over." Kira crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. "If you're here to take her again, don't waste your breath." Ward spoke before Connolly could. Her voice was calm, professional. "Ms. Wallace, the Department of Defense has launched an internal review following the recent incident. You're being summoned to a formal hearing to determine the legal custody of K-937. Code name Riley. She has a name," Kira said quietly, "and she's not property anymore." Connolly exhaled. "Be that as it may, the Defense Force wants answers. You've got 72 hours to report to RAF Base Point Cook." He paused, his tone softening just slightly. "This isn't a fight you can win with emotion. Wallace, you need to play it smart." When they left, Riley watched them drive away, her ears drooping slightly. Kira knelt beside her and ran a hand down her neck. "Guess they're not done with us yet, girl." The next few days were a blur. The town of Omeo rallied like a small army of its own. Merrill Jones, ever unshakable, organized a petition that spread across the state within hours. Her old church became a headquarters. Stacks of papers, laptop cords, and coffee cups everywhere. She spoke to journalists, veterans, and anyone who would listen. "She's not a piece of equipment," Merrill declared to a camera crew. "She's a hero, and heroes don't belong in cages." On the morning of the hearing, Kira drove to the base with Riley in the passenger seat, her head resting near the window. Ace and Daisy stayed with Merrill. The drive was long and quiet, the planes rolling endlessly under a grey sky. When they arrived, the sight of the base hit Kira like a memory. Everything was too clean, too ordered, the kind of precision that reminded her of years spent following orders without question. The hearing room was sterile, the walls lined with flags and framed commendations. 3 officials sat at a long table, the review board. At the center was Colonel Raymond Holt, a tall, broad man in his 50s with thinning blonde hair and sharp gray eyes. His posture was immaculate, his face carved in neutrality. To his right sat Dr. Susan Lyle, a civilian behaviorist for the K-9 Division. Mid-40s, dark skin, intelligent eyes behind thin glasses. Her expression was sympathetic, though cautious. The third, Lieutenant Graves, a young officer no older than 30, typed quietly at a laptop, his jaw tight. Kira stood before them, hands clasped behind her back, the way old habits demanded. Riley sat beside her, calm and still, her collar polished and her gaze steady. Colonel Holt began, "Ms. Wallace, this proceeding concerns the unlawful possession of military property, specifically 1K-937. However, given recent events, the board has agreed to consider all mitigating circumstances before rendering a decision." Kira nodded slightly. "Understood, sir." Dr. Lyle leaned forward. "We've reviewed footage of the Omeo bushfire. It's remarkable. Riley's actions were consistent with high-level search and rescue training. But the question stands, was she acting under your command or her own instincts?" Kira met her gaze. "Both. She's not just trained, she's alive. She chose to go back into that fire just like she chose to save me years ago when she was still under your command." A murmur rippled across the room. Holt's eyes flicked down at his papers. "According to our records, K-937 was listed as killed in action during Operation Nightfall." "She wasn't," Kira said firmly. "She was left behind." The colonel looked up, surprised by the edge in Kira's tone. "You're suggesting negligence?" "I'm suggesting she was treated like equipment instead of a life," Kira replied, her voice steady, "and yet she saved more lives as a civilian than she ever did as a soldier." Silence fell. Riley shifted slightly. her ears twitching. Dr. Lyle whispered something to Holt, who nodded slowly. Ms. Wallace, what do you propose? Kira looked down at Riley, then back at them. I'm not asking for medals or funding. Just recognition. Let her retire with honor. As every soldier should. Let her live out her life with her family where she's already proved she belongs. The colonel studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, smoothing his uniform. The board will deliberate. Hours passed. Kira sat outside on a bench, the wind cutting across the parade ground. Riley rested her head on Kira's knee, her eyes half closed. She stroked her fur absently, watching the flagpole whip against the grey sky. Finally, the door opened. Colonel Holt emerged, followed by the others. His face was unreadable as he approached. Ms. Wallace, he said, his voice even, after reviewing the evidence and the testimony of both local officials and eyewitnesses. The board has reached a unanimous decision. He paused. K937. Riley is hereby granted an honorary discharge with full recognition as a K9 veteran of the Australian Defence Force. Her service record will be amended accordingly. Kira's breath caught. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. You mean, she's free? Holt's mouth softened into something like a smile. She's one of us, Wallace. Always was. The colonel saluted, and for a moment, Kira hesitated before returning it. A slow, deliberate motion that carried the weight of years. Riley barked once, as if echoing the salute. That evening, Omeo gathered at the old church. Merrill had organized a small ceremony. The stained glass windows glowed golden in the lamplight. The pews filled with neighbors, firefighters, and veterans. At the front stood a wooden cross draped with a flag. And beside it, Riley sat proudly wearing a small medal on her collar. A custom-made tag engraved, honorably discharged. Sergeant Riley, K9 veteran. Merrill's voice trembled as she led the hymn. Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. The melody filled the space. Soft but powerful. People wiped tears from their eyes. Kira stood in the back for a long time, silent, watching as the light shimmered over Riley's fur like a benediction. When the song ended, she walked to her, kneeling beside her with a trembling smile. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Welcome home, Sergeant Riley." Riley leaned forward and pressed her head against Kira's chest. For the first time in years, Kira didn't feel like a woman haunted by the past. She felt like one finally at peace. Spring returned slowly to the high country that year. The long silence of winter melted into the sound of running water, thawing earth, and the calls of migrating birds overhead. Where the ridge once burned black, now soft green shoots were pushing through the ashes. It was as if the land itself had decided to begin again. Kira Wallace stood on the porch of what was once just her father's lonely shack. But now it was something far more. A place of healing. A wooden sign swayed above the entrance, carved by hand with care and patience. The letters caught the afternoon light. Gracehaven Sanctuary, where broken soldiers find their way home. The sanctuary was quiet except for the sounds of dogs, dozens of them running and barking across the open field behind the house. Most were K9 veterans, some scarred, some missing limbs, all carrying the kind of history that never leaves the eyes. But here, they were allowed to rest. Kira leaned on the porch rail, watching the scene unfold with a peace she hadn't felt in years. Riley lay under the big snow gum near the edge of the field. Her coat was touched with silver, her once strong frame softened by age. Her breathing was slower now, deliberate, as if each inhale was measured carefully against the memory of battles long past. Still, her eyes, those amber eyes, remained clear and steady. She watched Ace and Daisy, her two grown pups, moving gracefully across the yard as they guided a pair of young trainees through basic exercises. Ace had grown into a mirror of his mother, broad-shouldered, calm, and fiercely protective. Daisy, smaller but quicker, was the thinker, watchful, patient, the one who noticed the small things. The young dogs followed their every move, clumsy but eager, learning to listen to commands and to trust again. Kira smiled faintly. "You taught him well, Sergeant," she murmured toward Riley. Behind her, the sound of footsteps approached. Merrill Jones, now 60 but as strong-willed as ever, came carrying a tray of mugs. Her hair was a soft cloud of silver now, and her eyes held the serene glow of someone who had made peace with both life and loss. She wore a flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, her hands rough from work. "I told you not to skip lunch," she said, setting the tray down on the porch table. "You can't build a sanctuary on black coffee and good intentions." Kira chuckled. "You've been saying that since the first nail went into the fence." Merrill sat across from her, glancing at the fields. "And look at it now," she said softly. "They're finally safe. You know, when we started this, I didn't think people would come. I thought maybe we were too late, that the world didn't care anymore." Turns out they still do, Kira said. She nodded toward a group of visitors unloading supplies from a van. Half the donations we get are from families of handlers. They say it gives them comfort knowing their dogs have a home here. Among the visitors was Tom Alvarez, a retired Marine in his early 40s with deep brown skin, a shaved head, and a missing hand replaced by a carbon fiber prosthetic. He was quiet but gentle, his movements slow and deliberate. A German shepherd with a cloudy eye followed him everywhere. Tom knelt near the fence, letting his dog sniff the fresh grass, his face lit by a rare smile. First time she's been off a leash in 3 years, he had told Kira earlier that week. Feels like she's breathing again. Grace Haven had become that kind of place, a home for the forgotten. Some dogs came trembling, afraid of thunder or loud voices. Others arrived too aggressive, their loyalty twisted by years of training and fear. Kira and Merrill worked with them day by day, restoring trust through routine, patience, and kindness. They also welcomed veterans who, like Kira once had, were trying to outrun ghosts they couldn't name. In the evenings, the sanctuary glowed with lantern light. The smell of wood smoke and stew drifted through the air. Men and women gathered around the fire pit. Old soldiers, new volunteers, and dogs curled at their feet. Kira often told stories there, not of war, but of redemption. Tonight, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the fire crackled to life again. Tom Alvarez sat strumming an old guitar, his rough fingers coaxing out the tune of Amazing Grace. The others joined softly, their voices blending with the wind. Merrill hummed along, eyes closed, a faint smile on her lips. Riley, lying a few yards away, lifted her head at the sound, her ears twitching as if recognizing the melody from that night at the church months ago. Kira knelt beside her, brushing a hand through her fur. You still remember that song? Huh? She blinked slowly, her tail thumping weakly against the ground. The firelight danced in her eyes like a reflection of old missions. Old memories, but this time, there was peace behind them. As the night deepened, the group dispersed, leaving Kira and Merrill alone on the porch. The stars stretched endlessly overhead, sharp and clear in the mountain sky. The gum trees whispered in the wind, carrying the scent of snow and woods. She's slowing down, Merrill said quietly, looking toward Riley under the pine. Kira nodded, her throat tightening. Yeah, she's earned the rest. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the night filling the space between words. Eventually, Merrill rose, touching Kira's shoulder gently. I'll turn in, don't stay out too long. You'll catch a cold. Kira smiled faintly. I'll be fine. When Merrill disappeared inside, Kira stood and walked to the old snow gum. Riley lifted her head as she approached. Kira knelt beside her, one hand resting on her shoulder, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of her heartbeat. Ace and Daisy lay nearby, watching quietly, sensing something unspoken passing between their mother and the woman who had once been her soldier. The moonlight filtered through the branches, painting silver lines across the clearing. Kira looked out at the sanctuary, the fences, the kennels, the cabins for visiting veterans, all born from loss, rebuilt into grace. She thought of the years she had wasted running from the past, the soldiers she couldn't save, the guilt that had chained her. And yet here in this quiet corner of the world, surrounded by life and loyalty, she finally understood what it meant to come home. Riley's eyes closed slowly, her breathing calm and even. Kira stayed beside her, her voice barely above a whisper. Some heroes walk on 2 legs, she said, her words breaking slightly, others on 4. The wind swept softly through the trees, stirring the grass, carrying her words into the bush. The light from the house spilled across the yard, bathing the gum tree in a golden glow. In that moment, with the sound of wind and the beating of her heart beside Riley's, Kira felt no sadness, only gratitude, and as the first pale light of dawn crept across the horizon, she sat still beneath the tree, her hand resting gently on the old dog's fur. The world around her was quiet, blessed, alive. The war was finally over for both of them. In a world where too many hearts are scarred by war, loss, or silence, sometimes God's miracles don't arrive in thunder or light. They arrive on 4 paws, carrying loyalty instead of words and healing instead of judgment. Riley's story is not just about a dog or a soldier, but about the grace that waits quietly for those who choose love over fear and forgiveness over guilt. Maybe somewhere in your own life, God is sending you a reminder. 2. A reason to believe again. To open your heart to second chances. To the gentle miracles walking beside you every day. If this story touched you, share it so others can feel that same hope. Leave a comment with where you're watching from. Subscribe to our channel to help more stories like this find the people who need them. And may God bless you and your family with peace, compassion, and faith that never fades.